Hello, everyone, and welcome to the stream. My name is Mike D'Angelo. Today, we're going to be talking Tellest. Today, specifically, the idea of the episode is that we're going to be talking about the short stories that Tellest works on. These are specific to Tellest. They're not short stories that we've promoted with other people or anything like that. It's specifically stories that take place in the world of Tellest. At this point, we actually have over 36 short stories. I think we're probably a little bit over 40. I'm counting the stories that are not part of the Tales of Tellest series that we have from time to time. We released our second volume of short stories in an anthology last year as Tales of Tellest Volume 2. I'll be taking a little bit of a journey into Amazon a little bit later to kind of show you what that looks like. I did realize in the course of preparing over the last couple of minutes, I am definitely missing certain things on the website. Like, there really should be a way to very quickly bring up the Tellest specific short stories. Right now, I just have in the search box on the Tellest website, Tellest short story. You get a decent amount of things. We'll kind of step back into this in a moment or two. But the reason that I wanted to bring it up was because by the third page, you can see that we're starting to get into things that are not short stories. We're seeing things that are kind of adjacent to them. You know, we'll talk about, hey, a short story took place in Lustra, or here's, the cover art for the second book of short stories, things like that. But we also have short stories that we promoted for other people. I'm going to have to, maybe in the releases up here, maybe we'll throw something together that kind of cleans this up a little bit. Because Tales of Tellest, where these things kind of exist, they tell more of a story about what stories are within that book, including some of the longer pieces that we had from Tales of Tellest Volume 1. So I definitely want to help to kind of convey that idea. So what we're going to do is just kind of get a general understanding of why we went down this route. Prior to this, we had told technically 4 long-form stories that were epic by any other standard. So why go to the extreme opposite direction? And the reason for it was, much like when I'm talking on microphone, I tend to ramble a little bit. So when I told the story of the first 3 Chaos books, Chaos is Luca Cregan now, it was roughly 1,500 pages worth of content. I was still kind of in an experimental phase where I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go, things like that. It was a long story. I don't know necessarily that it was 1,500 pages that you needed. There's a possibility that some of it could have been cut. That's not to say that it couldn't have made sense the other way too. In the third book that I wrote, a lot of what we were kind of pursuing was Oh, thank you, Purple Mango 7, for following. Have a hug. One of the things that I did in the third book was, in keeping with that kind of experimentation, you don't see the main character for a good long time. We kind of cut him from the start of the book, which, in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have done. We spent a long time with him in the very end of the book, kind of playing catch up, and I think that it would have been a much nicer flow if we would have done things the opposite way. And that was kind of the reason that I wanted to do the short stories. It gave me an opportunity to kind of experiment in a different way. I was able to see how to get a lot of story out onto the page with a limited word count. A couple of times early on, I used resources like the fantasy writers' writing prompts on subreddits, things along those natures. And basically what I ended up realizing was that in addition to kind of spinning off a couple of different... give me 1 second. I'm going to put myself on intermission because I have a call coming through. I got such nice people looking out for me. So it looks like I got a couple of hellos. So hello to the people who joined the chat. For whatever reason, I didn't hear anything come through. So I'm gonna have to figure out some way to get in there and make some kind of audio pop up or something like that. I've got other people who are trying to get in, and it's looping and things like that. Hopefully, the people who are watching, they don't run into too many problems, but we'll see. Back to what I was talking about regarding the reasons that I went into, the short story realm of things. A lot of the reason that I wanted to do it was I wanted to learn how to tell a lot of story with a few words. Earlier on, it was a situation where I was kind of adhering to whatever word count and whatever writing prompt I was working on. Later, when I felt like I was beyond that, and I didn't want to spend too much time working on the prompts that other people set for me, and I just let my imagination kind of go, I got to a point where basically whatever story I wanted to tell was kind of coming to me in whatever other projects I was working on. So earlier on you had short stories like Blessings and Curses, which I think you can find on the website. Let me try and see if some of these things I can find for us as I'm speaking. And if they're not on the website anymore, no, it looks like we have them. They're separated into 3 parts. That was the way that I did things early on. These days, I try and put together a story all together. A lot of the times, what you're seeing is the people on Patreon. They'll have the first kind of rights to see the story. Sometimes the people on my newsletter, they get the next stab at it, and then after that, it ends up being free for anybody on the website. And then ultimately, what ends up happening is by the end of the time that it's on the website, it ends up in an anthology where you can read. It's going to be 24 books from now on every anthology. We have Tales of Tellest Volume 2 that just came out with 24 really great short stories. They're not all written by me. We have a lot of collaborators that we work with, from my wife Rihanna, who's written 2 or 3, maybe 4 good stories that have come out so far. We actually have a sequel. Not a sequel, a brand new story that she's working on soon. That's going to be her first non-short story. I'm really excited to tell more about that as we go into the back half of this year. We also have Aaron Canton, who has done a tremendous amount of work for the Tellest universe. He actually told the most recent short story within the Tellest universe, Minerva's Quest, which ties into a short story that I wrote for the first Tales of Tellest, The Littlest Kobold. It takes a character that was kind of lesser known in that story, broadens her out a little bit. I'd always had plans for her, but I had other things that I needed to attend to, and Aaron came through for me, and he wrote a beautiful story, and in tandem with Stephen Belshaw, who did great art for that story as well. We'll kind of take little detours here and there as we talk about these things. So if we look at Ligomorphs, I believe that they're on the website already. Nope. I'm just teasing it for later. We have, they might be in the April Fool's story, or I might have taken them out. Let's see if they're actually in Minerva's Quest. So the whole story of Minerva's Quest is Minerva, a character that we introduced in the short story The Littlest Kobold, has the ability to kind of communicate with animals and convince them to do her bidding and things like that. So we introduced these little critters, Ligomorphs. They're native to a single island in the Tellest universe. They don't show up anywhere else yet. The whole concept of these little critters is that they have the ability to morph into whatever they're perceiving. So in a situation like Minerva's, where she ended up on this island, she ends up finding these critters with some of her allies, and her allies are a mix of goblins, gnolls, dwarves. So that's why you have all these kind of cutesy-wootsy creatures trying to look tough, and it ends up helping them in the long run, because they have the the ability to kind of scare off would-be predators by appearing tougher than they are. So we have that. We have a couple of stories from Velena DeAngelis, no relation. She has done a Halloween story for us, and she's also done a story that followed one of our characters who showed up in the sequel to Mageborn, which is Transformed. She took one of those characters, brought them on a completely unrelated adventure that we're going to follow through and see where that leads us. And she's also got another short story that she already finished for us that she needs to actually wait for me to get off my butt and finish the sequel to Heart of the Forest, because it ties into that a little bit. We've also got short stories from our editor, Nace Flaw, who he's done a couple of becoming a hero, becoming a villain, becoming a man, that kind of stuff. And then he's working on some other stuff all the time for us. He actually plays D&D in the Tellest universe as well, using some of the resources that he's happened upon by being the editor for the universe. So that's a lot of fun. And then we've got a couple of short stories that aren't on the official timeline or anything like that. Like, they haven't made their way into the Tales of Tellest books, but our good friend Kevin Gallagher wrote a couple of stories that because we were messing with the timeline and things like that, they didn't end up in universe, and we needed to tweak some things. So they're kind of in there in spirit, but they're not part of the current timeline or anything like that. But and we're always looking for other writers, things like that. I've always got my head on a swivel trying to see who else we can bring into the mix. One of the things that I'll show you now is the actual anthologies themselves. So they are for sale on Amazon. We try to make them pretty cheap. The Tales of Tellest Volume 1, on top of getting 12 short stories, it's your greatest introduction to the world of Tellest, because you get 5 of the novellas included in the package. So you do get the 12 short stories, and then you get Mageborn, Son of the Storm, The Fall, The Tinker's Tale, and Awake, which is a great intro to a lot of great characters. All of the novellas from Tales of Tellest have gotten sequels, with the exception of The Fall. That's taking me a little longer to wrap up, just because it is such an integral story for the universe, and I want to make sure that I get that right. If you see in here, it gives you a little bit of a better idea of the big stories and lets you know that there's an additional 12. Again, last year we wrapped up another 24 stories. The kind of underlying thread within the Tales of Tellest universe is there's a character named Reese who has traveled into the void, where he meets basically a deity named Nersha, who allows him the ability, not by his choice, but allows him the ability to kind of move through time. If you were a fan of Sliders growing up, or you've just recently seen it for the first time or anything like that, that's kind of the notion that I work with here. There's a little bit of Doctor Who, there's a little bit of Sliders, a little bit of Inuyasha in the Reese stories, because a lot of what happens is related to a shattered orb from the void that ends up causing everything to go wibbly-wobbly time-wise. And yeah, so the first Tales of Tellest kind of bookended with his stories. I think we go in the same route with Tales of Tellest Volume 2, but there's a third story lying around in there, because I didn't want him to go it alone permanently. So we introduce a really interesting sidekick for him, and that'll follow him into the future and the past, and however it ends up going. But he's really integral to the overall timeline that we're building towards. I've talked a couple of times about how the Tellest timeline has changed. To some extent, he may be responsible for that. They say that even just observing something causes its state to change. So that might be the case for him. As we near Tales of Tellest Volume 3, and then whatever comes later than that, we'll get into a little bit more details about that. The synopsis here kind of shows the returning characters that we have. So Tales of Tellest Volume 1 introduced Rhys Oberon. It introduced J.D. Rivers, which is one of Aaron Canton's characters that he developed for the world of Tellest. She's got an appearance here as well. Kunal Johar was a character that we introduced in a story called Remembered in Gold, which is kind of like the story of the lottery, but with even darker connotations. And then Aaron also helped us introduce a couple of other characters. One of the characters that he introduced for us was Leica, who is a golem maker, one of our youngest heroes. So it's really interesting to see things from like a younger perspective. And we have things like the Tellest babies, the Quantum Quest babies, things like that. But she really is like the driving force for younger tales for our characters. So it's cool to see that. And then one of the ones that we introduced is Bixby Aladocious, who I'm going to take a little bit of a step back to explain. So Bixby Aladocious started off as an April Fool's joke, basically. We just liked the way that it rolled off the tongue and kind of sounded like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. We took a twist on that character and made him basically one of the bigger parts of the Tellest universe now, because one of the things that we introduced because of that was the notion of the Calistrazi, which up until that point didn't exist. The Calistrazi and the Tellest universe are like the first men that emerged from the mountains after what we're calling the convergence. And to kind of understand that, we have to take a step even further back and talk about the Fall again. So the Fall is the separation of Tellest into two worlds. You have what was left of Tellest, and then you have Earth. Basically, Earth spun off from Tellest, and then thousands of years later, there was an event that caused the convergence, which made the two worlds combine again. So after a long time, Tellest became one again, and mankind basically had to reemerge from the Earth. And the Calistrazi is the notion that the first men who arrived from the other version of our world, they were the ones who developed powers the quickest. So a lot of the Calistrazis that we see in the short stories, in the longer form stories, in references to the past and things like that, they have a lot of the stronger powers. In some ways, they play into some modern day stories, either because of dark powers, resurrecting people, or powers being kind of extracted from great artifacts and things like that. So Bixby has a tie into a lot of the Calistrazi mythology and things like that. And because of that, the strain kind of affects him a little bit differently. So we took this idea of this joke character and ended up writing short stories specifically for him. He's one of the craziest characters in the Tellest pantheon because his power is that he dies. On the face, that doesn't seem like a great power, but the important thing is that he dies a lot. And to die a lot, you have to live a lot. So in his case, what he does is every time he dies, he ends up in a place called the Nexus. And the Nexus is basically kind of the pathway to, whatever's next. So whether that means you're going to paradise, you're going to eternal damnation, Bixby doesn't have to worry about that. He basically can return to the land of the living, reconstitute his soul into a working body. His old body remains where it was. So if he dies, he can go and find his old body to whatever crazy antics that creates. So we ended up creating Bixby as a joke character, created a couple of short stories for him, and then most recently, he spun off from his little short stories into being what's arguably one of the starring roles in The April's Fools. Now, right now, we can see the cover of The April's Fools in the background here. Let me jump into another piece here so we can see if I can just show off the cover a little bit more. Let's see here. So Bixby went from this nobody character to, he's the frontmost character on the cover. So he's really taken a shine to a lot of people. He's become a very important character to me. So I'm very happy to continuously be able to bring him kind of to the forefront. We've looped in some other stories that were specific and exclusive to the newsletter and combine that with his story to some effect. We've been able to do a lot of cool things with the short stories. Rihanna has done sequels from the first Tales of Tellest into the second Tales of Tellest. We like to kind of see where these characters have gone. In a lot of cases, we're seeing characters who either roundabout have made their way into the longer form stories. Either they're showing up themselves or there's references to them. For instance, in the third Ancestral Magic book that's coming out, the third Adelia book, there is a character that showed up in Rihanna's story Spectral Tides, who references some of the other characters who are there. The fun part is that they end up showing up in a couple of other stories as well. There's just a lot of connective thread when it comes to the Tellest universe. The short stories offer up a lot of good opportunities to do that. And to that extent, we try to give them a nice amount of exposure. It's not just, words on a page or anything like that. We try to kind of give it some big presence. Whether that's things like this, where you're throwing together a special image just for the story that you're telling. This right here, Don't Wake the Dead, is one of the short stories that I wrote for Halloween last year. Speaking of Calistrazi, this was the first time that we ever saw one of the Calistrazi who should, in theory, be dead, show up on their own volition, which was a pretty cool story because there's not a lot of fantasy horror creatures that I feel like are walking around, and we had the opportunity to do something here with Thune Soren, who this will not have been the last time that we see him. We've got some pretty big plans for him. We've also got some other Halloween stories that we've gotten from Aaron Canton in the past. These actually are a couple of our Quantum Quest characters that we've pulled right out of the card game. So this is Noth Vox and Raya Sver. So we got to do some pretty cool things with them to see them come to life in ways that you don't typically see. Let's see. We've got a couple of other pieces of work that we've gotten from that art was by Warren Suen Lee, who also did the picture of Thune Soren. Let me see if I have some other stuff. I did mention that we had a couple of other people's promos that are showing up just because I haven't really done a good job of cleaning up the way that the site presents them. This is Reese Oberon, who we've talked about earlier. He's kind of like that through line that shows a lot of what's going on. Let's see what else we got. We got that cover art from Tales of Tellest Volume 2 again, and you can see a lot of the art that we've acquired throughout the years ended up on this cover because we are pointing to a lot of different people, so a lot of it's character art. We'll take a deeper dive into this real quick. So in this cover art, you can see things like, here's Reese on the front. This is Devlin, who plays into the Bixby Aladocious of it all. We've got Leica over here. We've got Callie Flynn Zaxos, who is in another short story that we released called The Elf of Black Iron Lake. We have Faye Pavi, who's shown up in a couple of stories, including the Quantum Quest novelization, which will be out later this year. We've got J.D. Rivers, who we've talked about. Here's another Bixby piece. We've got Faradorn, who shows up in not only the short story City of Light and Darkness, but he also makes his way into longer form narrative in Arise, which is the sequel to Awake. We've got another one of Aaron Canton's characters down here, who I think his name is escaping me at the moment. He was in a short story that he wrote that was just kind of like an experimentation of kind of Logano society, and we wanted to kind of experience that a little bit more. This is kind of false advertisement down here. We're showing off a picture of the Warp Elves, and we actually removed the story of the Warp Elves from the second Tales of Tellest because the story itself is probably large enough where if we cleaned it up a little bit, it's going to be its own standalone release. We just have to tighten it up a little bit, maybe expand some of what we have to make sure that it can stand on its own effectively. So you can see there is a lot of stuff going on. and we're working on more stuff all the time. We're taking a little bit slower these days, just because, as I had mentioned before, we kind of took me out of a situation where I was a little bit more flexible with my budget. But that's perfectly fine. That gives me more time to work on the actual stories themselves, and then we'll start to work on, adding more people into our pantheon again. So this was that the Elf of Black Iron Lake. Callie Flinzaxos is another one of our Quantum Quest characters, as you can see here. We tend to do that a lot. While Quantum Quest was originally a kind of spin-off of Tellest, it's become kind of its own breeding grounds for new stories. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to learn new things about the world, to kind of polka dot things in the world with new areas for people to hail from. We wouldn't have known about a lot of the cities that show up in our world anvil if it wasn't for these characters and the kind of brief backstories that we gave them, that we then subsequently build on after that. You can see, again, here's that picture of the Warp Elves from the Halloween Story Searchlight. I feel like we're getting to a point now where we're going to see a lot of just basic stuff. We're not going to see a lot of the pieces kind of flow together, but we'll take a real quick look. I think this new hero joining the ranks of Tellest is either a Spider-Man joke. Nope. This is the inception of Bixby Aladocious. So we just had this very brief flash fiction. All this information that we took from him, we ended up linking into the world of Tellest. I do see you, Pickledorf. I did not get the audio to kind of let me know that anything came through. And I guess to some extent that kind of makes sense, because while I only have a couple of followers, the folks who have dozens and dozens, they would just hear nothing but chimes, chimes, chimes. There's got to be a better way for me to kind of conceptualize that kind of thing. But it is tough because I have the two monitors up and they're not side by side. Like, I have to kind of turn my attention. So I'll have to try and figure out if there's a better way to do something like that. Like, maybe I can bring it up on my phone or on my tablet or something like that. I don't know. I'll have to... mounting it above me is probably not a bad idea if I can do it with the tablet. I'll have to figure it out. Yeah, I'll experiment with that a little bit. Probably not this week, just because it is so hot. But I'll play around with it. I'll look online and see what people recommend. Because I don't want to miss these conversations or anything like that. It's important to engage with the people who you're talking to. So I appreciate you, number one, letting me know that there were first time chats that I didn't see. And for continuing to kind of talk me through it, because a lot of this is just me rambling, but it's nice to be able to have like that sounding board where I'm talking to someone else. So I mean, for the most part, we kind of took like a short but deep dive into the Tellest universe. As far as the short stories go, I don't want to go too crazy. Again, I do tend to ramble, and I knew that this was going to be a kind of rambling episode as I showed off a lot of the stuff. But as always, I am going to kind of bring us to a chat section of the episode. So let me drop us over to the intermission tab. Nope, I'm sorry, the chat break tab. It's not too hot in here right now because I'm allowing myself to use the fan in the room. Give me 1 second. I've got a Yeti mic that I kind of like have to lean into a little bit, but so I'm going to, we'll run this for another 5 minutes or so, unless chat keeps me going longer than that, but I don't want to go too crazy. So I know that I had a follower on the stream today, and I did not see them land here in the bottom left. So let's hear more about that Supercalistrazi Mystic Bixby Aladocious. Misery, what could I tell you about Bixby? What kind of things are you interested in hearing? And I like how it's Bixby Aladocious. Aladosius. I think Misery might be shy. She didn't expect to be called out like that. So I will kind of... Your chat is also not popping up in the chat part. It shows up. It's just... There's... It dies pretty quick. Yeah, it was there for Misery. But at the time, I don't think that I was on the chat break thing. So you have to include the chat as a source, and that chat source wasn't there. I sees it now. How he doing? He good. Yeah, Bixby is doing all right, I think, by the nature of the way that things happen with Bixby. One way or another, he's always good. He definitely can practice all the skydiving. So one of the fun things about Bixby that ends up kind of being alluded to, but I don't know if it's 100% described in the big book that he's part of. When you don't have a fear of dying, it almost becomes a situation where you want to experience it, to the point where you want to experience what dying is in every which way. So skydiving, definitely one of those things. What does it feel like to dive off of an airship or off of a dragon's back and just slam face first into the ground? Is... Once the novelty of death wears off, is there almost a comforting feeling to it? Do you go and try and feel what it's like to die by drowning? Do you go and try and feel what it's like to die by burning? All those kind of things that Bixby gets to experience, he certainly can. And he's a little bit, we'll say, reckless with a lot of the things that he does, because he doesn't have to worry too much about himself. So... Which one, Matt? Do you think it's the someone joining the chat now without context? Well, luckily, anybody who's seeing this on YouTube hopefully is not jumping to this point and getting that. Burning is your preferred way not to die. What do you think is the most comforting way to die? I've heard that drowning is, I guess, the people who've almost drowned and then ended up being rescued afterwards. There's almost a sense of comfort. Death by pudding sounds pretty nice. Death by buttered noodles, maybe. Yeah, I've heard that people who end up almost drowning, there's a euphoria that washes over you. Oh. Well, yeah, I mean, if you turn into human salsa, I guess that's kind of one of those things. If you don't have any time to conceptualize what's happening to yourself, that probably works out pretty well for you. Yeah, I feel like maybe implosion is not that bad. What's a Trito? Human salsa, nacho problem. All of the Tritos. That's how you get diabetes. Canine diabetes. We've got a situation with Bixby where I think even if he tried, he wouldn't be able to gorge himself to death. Although I'm sure that he has tried. Walnuts stick to mind as one of the things that he's overindulged in, possibly. That's another thing. If you knew that you were allergic to something, but you didn't have to worry about... I mean, Misery already has that situation where she knows she's allergic to things and risks it every single day. But can you imagine being fatally allergic to blowfish or something? And he's like, yeah, it's about time. It's been 7 months since the last time I died because of eating blowfish. Let's eat some fugu. All right, so we are coming up to 7:50. I don't want to artificially inflate this video too long. So if anybody has any last minute questions to throw in there, we'll answer them, and then we'll cut to the closing window. I got to throw together a loop for the goodbye music as well. I just had enough time to kind of experiment with the intro scene. Alrighty, as we near that 40-minute mark, that's where I'm going to close this up. But I did want to thank everybody who joined the stream, anybody who's watching this later. I do appreciate you adding to the experience and giving me someone to talk to. And I hope that it was a little bit enlightening to find out a little bit more about what the world of Tellest is all about. Give me a second. I'll let you know for next Monday what the topic is going to be. So we talked this week about the short stories. Next week is all going to be about the art gallery. We do a new art image every Wednesday, and I'm actually behind on making sure that the art gallery is up to date. So for next week, I'll make sure that I have some homework that I put together, and we'll make sure that we clean that up a little bit. Alrighty, we got 10 seconds, and then we're at that 40-minute mark. So again, thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you to my new followers, and I will see you tomorrow for some map making, and then next Monday for some more Talking Tellest. Thank you very much.